So in today's video, we are going to be power ranking the NFC West. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So this is the final power rankings video. I've already done every other division. Now this is the final division that I'll be power ranking. Now, to be honest, this is probably the second or third toughest division in all of the NFL, because if we're looking at the other divisions, the AFC West is probably the toughest division in the NFL right now. But then you also have, in my opinion, the AFC North. That's going to be a very tough competitive division. It kind of was last year. So this is one of the top three toughest divisions in all of football. And this division, even though, you know, the bottom team in the Seahawks, this division is still loaded with talent, loaded with teams, and loaded with great head coaches. So all in all, this is still a very, very tough division. But coming in at number 4 is the Seattle Seahawks. I just think that the Seattle Seahawks, they are not going to be a very good football team next year, in my opinion. Obviously, trading away Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos is a huge loss to the Seattle Seahawks. It's obviously their quarterback situation's not very good. And then releasing Bobby Wagner in the way that they did it, him not knowing that he was going to be released, having to find out through social media. They didn't even tell him that he was going to do it. He was with them the same amount of time as Russell Wilson, and it was just a bad way that the Seahawks handled the Bobby Wagner release. So obviously they lost two really key players, two players that were really the heart and soul on both sides of the ball, obviously Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner. So if you're looking at the Seahawks, I just don't think they're going to be a good football team. They've mentioned many times that they're not going to be a rebuilding team, but when you have Drew Lock as your quarterback, you really don't know who the quarterback's really going to be. Is it going to be Drew Lock or Geno Smith? Right now it looks like it's going to be Drew Lock. But with Drew Lock as your quarterback, you're really not a team that's setting up to be successful, because I've seen Drew Lock play. He played against the Chiefs many a times, and he's just not a good quarterback. He's just not a good quarterback in the NFL in general. So if you're admitting that Drew Lock is your starting quarterback, you can tell yourself until you're blue in the face that you're not in a rebuild. But the Seattle Seahawks are closer to a rebuild than they are to being a contending team, in my opinion. So the Seahawks, they obviously have a lot of things that they have to do. But obviously when it comes to the draft, I think they did a pretty good job when it comes to the draft. They drafted Boye Mafe on the defense, so that's a good start, at least for the defense, losing Bobby Wagner. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I think they have a lot of good pieces on the offensive side of the football. First, they drafted an offensive line, but kind of a little bit late. They drafted Charles Cross in the first round, but that's a little bit late if you ask me, because that's something they probably should have done when Russell Wilson was still there last year, drafting an offensive lineman. So it's a little bit late when it comes to that aspect of the offense. But they have DK Metcalf, they have Tyler Lockett, they have Noah Fant, who came over in the Broncos trade. They have Rashad Penny, which I know some people are not high on him, but he came alive late in last season. He was putting up some big numbers to end last season. And then they also drafted Kenneth Walker. So the pieces are there to at least start the process of becoming a good team. But with Drew Lock as your quarterback, you're not going to be a good team. You lost Bobby Wagner on that defense, and that defense that ranked 28th last year, you're not really a team that's really going to be looking to compete in the division. But again, these are all my opinions. But if we're looking at the Seahawks, I just think that they're one of the more terrible teams in the NFL right now, just based off of the situation that they're in. Then coming in at number 3 is the Arizona Cardinals. Now, you could toss up the Cardinals and the 49ers, in my personal opinion. I think these two teams are very close when it comes to where you could rank them in any power rankings list. I think these two teams are very similar when it comes to how good they're going to be. Now, obviously, I have the Cardinals at number 3, but if we're looking at the Cardinals in their offseason as a whole, it's been a distraction-filled offseason. It obviously started with their playoff loss to the Rams, where Kyler Murray and just the Cardinals in general just did not show up to the game. They were really bad. The one play that sticks out in my mind was a terrible interception that Kyler Murray threw. So it was not a good game for the Cardinals. They just did not show up. So that's how their offseason started. And then you have Kyler Murray and his offseason drama with the Cardinals, the contract situation, the long statement that his agent sent out, that whole fiasco. He removed any references to the Cardinals on his social media pages. So that was a distraction-filled offseason already when it comes to the Cardinals. And then on draft night, they trade for Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown, which was kind of confusing at the time, because we're like, why would you trade for a wide receiver and give up a first-round pick for it? That didn't make sense. But then a few days later, it came out that DeAndre Hopkins was suspended for PED use, so it kind of came full circle. It kind of made sense on why that the Cardinals made that move for Marquise Brown in the draft. But it looks like a lot of this garbage that the Cardinals are going through is in the rearview mirror, and that's kind of in the past. And I made a separate video discussing the Cardinals with DeAndre Hopkins out, and I think the team is going to be okay. I just think that the Cardinals, they have to take advantage of the fact that they start off hot every single year, and with DeAndre Hopkins out, they have to get off to that quick start. Take advantage of the fact that you can get off to hot starts, and then you're going to get DeAndre Hopkins back later in the season, and then hopefully you guys, the Cardinals don't fall off, because the Cardinals every single year seem to fall off later in the season. And I just think, at least with them starting off hot, it's going to be harder, I think, for them to fall off this year, just for the fact they are getting DeAndre Hopkins back later in the season. But if we're looking at the Cardinals as a whole, they're a really good football team. They are a loaded football team with talent. Obviously, like I said, trading for Marquise Brown, who played with Kyler Murray in college, so that's going to be good for Kyler Murray and his play. They extended Zach Ertz this offseason, which can coincide with them drafting Trey McBride, who was a really good tight end in college. So that's going to be a really good duo of tight ends for the Cardinals. And then they have A.J. Green, Rondale Moore, who are really good players. A.J. Green can still give you a important catch every once in a while that you need. So they're fine when it comes to wide receiver. But they also have James Conner, who was just a touchdown machine for them last year. So offensively, they're going to be a good team. And defensively, I think they're going to be just fine too. They did lose Chandler Jones, but they did draft Myaji Sanders and Connor Thomas. So they have more players on the defensive side of the ball. So they're going to be, I think, a good defense still, like they were last year. They were the 11th ranked defense last year. With the Cardinals, for me personally, it's just the fact that they start off hot every year and then they fall off. I think this year is going to be even more important for that start of the season for them to start off hot, but then with them getting D-Hop back, they're going to have to continue to play well later in the season, because it could get a little bit fishy and a little bit dicey later in the season, because the Cardinals the last few years, like I said, started off hot, then fell off. So I think even though they did lose DeAndre Hopkins, I still think the team is in a fairly solid position to be a good football team next year. So coming in at number 2 is the 49ers. Now, I had them ranked number 10 in my power rankings post-draft, and that still stands because I still think they're a really good football team. My only thing with the 49ers, I just don't like the situation that they're in when it comes to the quarterback position, because I really would like for the 49ers to figure out what they're doing at the quarterback position, because originally it looked like Jimmy Garoppolo was going to get traded this offseason, but he had surgery, so that kind of hindered it, pushed things back. So that kind of halted that situation there with the 49ers and Jimmy Garoppolo. And it's just with the quarterback position, again, it's just very dicey. I just don't know what to make of the 49ers. But even through the quarterback issues, I guess you could say, I still think they're going to be fine. Now, for me personally, just real quick, I think that Jimmy Garoppolo gets a bad rap. I know that he does not play well at times. Like, he did not play well in the fourth quarter of the NFC Championship game last year. I get all of that. But at the same time, I still think Jimmy Garoppolo is a fairly solid quarterback. And in his time starting for the 49ers, he's made it to 2 conference championship games and a Super Bowl. Now, obviously, he's not playing up to what they want, and they're hoping that that's what Trey Lance can bring to the football team. But I still think Jimmy Garoppolo is still more than serviceable as a quarterback, especially in the Kyle Shanahan offense. He runs the offense exactly how Shanahan wants, even though he does make a few boneheaded mistakes at times. I still think Jimmy is a very good quarterback. But this is a team that just made it to the NFC Championship game, and I really don't see the 49ers falling off that much, if you ask me. They did hold a 10-point lead heading into the fourth quarter of that game, and then obviously fell apart in the fourth quarter. But this is a team that I still think is going to be a very good team next year. I think Kyle Shanahan's a good head coach. And in the playoffs, they were able to beat the Packers and the Cowboys. So they were able to make a deeper playoff run, especially how the late in the season ended, that they had to beat the Rams in the final week because the Saints beat the Falcons. And the 49ers were able to make it to the playoffs by handling their business, beating the Rams in the final week of the season. So all in all, I still think that the 49ers are a really good team. Now, obviously, we had the whole Debo situation this offseason, which is something that's definitely going to have to get sorted out. But that situation as itself seems to have quieted down quite a bit. So I think when it comes to that situation, the 49ers are going to be fine. And offensively, the 49ers have a really, really good offense. They have Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and it really doesn't matter who's at running back because they all seem to be somewhat successful. So offensively, I think the 49ers are going to be fine. It's their defense that's going to be really good again. They have Eric Armstead on that defensive line, Nick Bosa on that defensive line. They drafted Drake Jackson. So the defensive line is going to be just as good as it ever was. They added Charvarius Ward, who was good for the Chiefs last year. So all in all, I think the 49ers are still a really good football team, but they're in a very tough division, and I still think you can interchange the Cardinals and the 49ers. They're that close in talent and how good I think they are. But coming in at number 1 is the Super Bowl champions Los Angeles Rams. Now, I don't understand the Rams because the cap space literally does not seem to exist with them whatsoever. Now, they did lose Von Miller to the Bills. They traded Robert Woods to the Titans, but I really don't think that's going to have much effect on this team whatsoever. They extended Matthew Stafford for at least 3 more years. They signed Bobby Wagner, who gets to now play the Seahawks twice a year in 2 revenge games next season. So obviously they're going to have guys that are fired up and ready to go for this next season. So they have really good players. But if you just look at the team as a whole, they still have Cooper Kupp, who was the receiving Triple Crown winner last year. They added Allen Robinson, who finally gets to play with a really good quarterback after his time in Chicago. And then Van Jefferson's a really, really good receiver. Tyler Higbee is a great tight end that doesn't really get talked about. Offensively, the only thing with the Rams is their left tackle position because Andrew Whitworth did retire. So that position has a little bit of work that it's going to have to do. But all in all, I think this offense is going to be just as good. Sean McVay is a great head coach. I mean, if we're looking at their draft, they didn't really have to have much of a draft because they kind of say F them picks. But they added the pieces that they needed in free agency anyway, so I think the Rams are just fine. And then you look at their defense is obviously elite. Aaron Donald finally got that Super Bowl ring, and he was the main reason why they won that Super Bowl. That play that won them the Super Bowl was honestly one of the greatest defensive plays maybe ever seen. It was a very good defensive play by Aaron Donald. And then they still have guys like Jalen Ramsey and Leonard Floyd. They still have a loaded defense that's going to be really good. I don't see anybody, at least in their division, probably getting past the Rams, even though the teams can play them tough. The 49ers play them tough. The Cardinals play them tough. I just think that the Rams are not only the best team in their division, I think they're the best team in their conference right now. And right now they might be the favorites. You know, you still have the Buccaneers who got Tom Brady back, but in the NFC, I think the Rams are probably the best team in their conference still. And I think they got, in a way, even better than what they were last year by getting guys like Bobby Wagner, Allen Robinson on the offensive side of the ball. So I think the Rams, they're going to be just fine, and they probably make a deep playoff run again. But those are my NFC West power rankings. Give me your NFC West power rankings down below, and I'll see you in the next one.